going to talk about athletes being paid to play sports, and I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting talk. And again, thank you all for participating.
Well, thank you guys for being here, and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the topic. It's an interesting topic in the sense that obviously I'm involved directly in it with my position at Fort Hayes, but I've also worked in professional sports. I've worked in Division I programs. I've worked at Division II, and so there's a number of different dynamics that go into this topic in general, depending on where you're at and the context with which you are viewing, or the lens in which you're viewing the topic. I don't disagree with any of it. I can get on about any side of this issue and give a corresponding dissenting opinion of any side of it, because the process, or it all starts with paying and the perception of pay as it relates to athletics. When you talk about pay, do you count the physical benefits of being a collegiate athlete and the access to the equipment? Is that considered part of pay? Do you count as a detriment to that the amount of wear and tear you put on a body, the types of things that you subject yourself to from a time and stress standpoint? Does that detract from the amount of pay? If you're an athlete, you might look at it one way. If you're sitting on the sidelines or looking at it from the outside, it might be something that you'd look at differently. And so I'm, I guess, aware of all perspectives as it relates to how the whole pay-to-play conversation can be viewed. And so from that standpoint, I'd be curious to hear from you guys as to what your thoughts are on it, or what your perceptions are of this whole topic, and kind of where that perception has been drawn from. Is it from ESPN? Is it from the negative stories or the violations that are reported and committed by large organizations, large governing bodies against large organizations and large governing bodies? What are you guys as students and student athletes, where do you see these things going? And I know that turns the table a little bit on you guys from maybe some of these talks in general, but I think it's important so that I understand what's going on between your ears, so that we can talk about how these things are or not viewed. So I would throw it out there to any of you guys and ask what your thoughts are on it. Where do you guys stand on that?
Well, I was a college athlete, and they, in my opinion, they paid me. They paid for my school. They paid for my books, everything I needed except housing. And I probably saved about $6,000 doing that.
Okay.
So they paid me $6,000 to get in really good shape and have fun.
Yeah.
What sport did you play?
I was a pole vaulter, so I was track, running, lifting every day.
Yes.
I have a question. I don't know much about this subject. Like, when you say paid to play, is it like in scholarships and like in terms of that, or is it like an actual like stipend?
Well, and see, that's
like
where
it's their job.
That's where at the Division I level they've approved a stipend system, and we're obviously Division II school, so we don't have that in place. But that stipend at the Division I level is designed to cover the gap between the tuition, books, fees, housing that they already pay those athletes, more for like the incidentals and the ongoing money, the pocket money, if you will.
Right.
And so that's where, like I said, it all predicates itself on your vision or your perception of what do you determine to be pay. In some cases, it's I was paid to get in good shape and do something I enjoy doing, and that's one aspect of pay. Is that the same as going to work at taco shop and getting paid, even though you may or may not enjoy serving people and working at a quote unquote regular job? I mean, those are all that underpins the entire conversation as it relates to the pay to play in general. Do you, as an athlete or a non-athlete, view what they are doing on those fields and courts as work or not? Do you, I mean, those are all valid points both ways, but like I said, I can get on about any side of it that you want to. But in more direct response, the stipend piece is more for the pocket money at the Division I level, because they're not based on their schedule of classes, practices, things of that nature. It's tough for them to hold down a part-time job at taco shop, because you've got study table and practice and lifting and games and travel, and now all of a sudden, and you might have some film depending on your sport, all of a sudden now you can only work an hour on Tuesday evening and you can work an hour on Sunday afternoon, and who wants to hire somebody that can only schedule 2 hours a week? So it makes it tough for athletes to get that pocket money type job. So that's kind of the impetus behind why they went to that stipend system in a vague term, but that's kind of what it's designed to do. Now, does that open the door for corruption and all these other things? Absolutely. You know, and you saw it probably late 80s, early 90s. You saw it with places like OU. You saw it with places like Miami, University of Miami, where they were having a bunch of, you know, boosters and folks like that writing big checks, kids not having to show up but getting paid, those types of things. And that's where the stipend piece can be corruptible, I guess. But if you follow the money, you're going to find where most things are rooted in all these scenarios. In a case like, you know, some of our sports, our athletes don't get a ton of money in relation to the time they put in. We know that. Everybody knows that. I played at this level and coached at this level and understand that, you know, the amount of dollars you get in scholarship, especially at the Division II level, does not factor out if you divide the number of hours into it. But again, you get some health benefits from it, you get some camaraderie, you have some fun, you do some different things that are not within the same scope as a quote-unquote regular student, in the sense that you're going to go different places, see different things, compete at a different level, and those are all, again, benefits. But by the same token, you're missing out on spring break at Panama City, or you're missing out on different things. So there's trade-offs. Like I said, in all these things, there's two sides to it, and it cuts both ways. That's what I think, regardless of where you stand and how you view pay as a financial measurement, you have to see both sides of the topic. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
What other thoughts do you guys have as far as your opinion of pay, the word pay, and your, you know, those types of things?
I think something else that we have to look at is, I think especially for Division I schools, sports bring in a lot of revenue to the college, and so I think that when you look at athletes as people who are helping to benefit the college in that way, they need some kind of compensation for that. Now, what kind of compensation is definitely in question, but if you're raking in huge amounts of money like Wichita State and KU are doing, then you have to you can probably afford to give your players that extra stipend or something to show that benefit, I think.
And that's another thing that they had said when they were in the process of trying to push that through was, you know, you've got, you know, Alabamas and Texases and monster crowds of football or basketball fans paying all kinds of large sums of money for tickets and merchandise and all the things that, you know, the exposure. I mean, you can't put you can put a price tag on it, but there's a lot of value to the exposure you gain, not only with, you know, the national television audiences that you get for your school, but also the, you know, types of things that you can do to promote your organization or your sport. You can put those in a large pool, and you could not write a check as an institution and get that much exposure as you did in that one game that you had in prime time on Saturday afternoon and, you know, in the late fall. You've got, you know, 100,000 fans in the building. You've got another however many thousand outside the building. You've got however many thousand watching, millions watching. Those have values, that has value not only to the athletic department, but the school in general. And in that regard, it's a very big exposure piece, not only from the name recognition side, but also from the fact that you're going to be able to increase the visibility of the overall organization and expose them to where this place is at, what this organization does, how it works. And that's something that you can buy commercials till the cows come home, but until somebody sees it in an organic setting like that, where it's totally unscripted, totally unstaged, that's what makes it exciting. I mean, if you're a KU or a K-State or Iowa or wherever fan, there are events that you go to, whether it's a basketball game at KU or football at K-State, or, you know, as a student you go to those types of things, and it's part of the experience as a student there, or the culture, and that's something that's very immeasurable, because you can't say how much that means to somebody as a student until years down the road, when they are watching their alma mater on TV, or saying, oh, I went there, or, you know, having that school pride down the line. It also helps you, like I said, recruiting new students, getting new people in to your organization, growing the student base. More students is more money for the overall institution in the form of tuition, housing, all the things that you guys pay as students every semester. And so having that type of influence over where you want to go to school, or having a 3-hour commercial for your institution, that's pretty expensive outlay of cash if you were going to buy 3 hours on Saturday afternoon on a network. But instead, you're getting that exposure because of an athletic team that you've got that's having some success and people want to watch. So it's, like I said, a trade-off for that. What other types of things would you have as an idea or an opinion? Or I kind of put you guys on the spot, and I realize that, but it's part of I think the dialogue, in the sense that you have to have an idea of what your perception of our. Yes.
I guess a concern of mine is sometimes when you see the scholarships just for student athletes, the GPA requirement seems to be a little more lenient, as opposed to students who are involved in numerous organizations on campus and also pulling part-time jobs. I see student athletics as really a job too, considering the amount of hours put in. So I guess if maybe you could just provide some feedback on why there's that discrepancy when other students are involved in a lot too, but it's a little more lenient for athletes to have a lower GPA.
Okay, I think I understand your question. If I don't, let me know.
Okay.
The NCAA requires all of our student athletes to pass 12 hours a semester at a minimum of a 2.0 GPA. And that has to be done every semester. Now, with that in mind, some of those kids are getting by with a 2.1, 2.2 type of a GPA. And the scholarships that you may see them getting are high relative to their GPA. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. In that example, you know, that may be a kid who is one of about three things. One, they are extremely talented athletically. Setting that piece aside, he's got an athletic, or she has got an athletic skill or set of skills that simple supply and demand economics requires us to pay that number of dollars to acquire. So if, for example, in basketball, you've got Kate Lehman, who's not a complete example because she's got a great GPA, but I'm saying skill set wise, she's a 6'4" girl, pretty athletic. To get a 6'4" girl to come to Hayes, Kansas costs more than it costs to get a 6'4" girl to go to Division I or someplace like that. So the economics of the skill set is a factor in what you're asking. The other part of it that's kind of a factor in the sense that if you've got a 2-1, 2-2 type kid, depends on what kind of a high school or what kind of a background they have, because some kids that do tend to be more athletic also tend to come from areas that may not have as strong a school system, to where they're a little bit playing catch up during the course of their ramping up to get to the college speed. So they may have started out below where they needed to be, and to get to where they need to be to pass their classes and do well, they need, I mean, they're going to take a D or two, or they're going to take a U or two and knock that GPA down. So there's some of that as well. But the other part that's interesting is in those scenarios, I mean, most of it, if we as an athletic department write a scholarship, our coaches will be the ones that say how much it's going to be for and all that sort of stuff, because they know their needs. They need a 6'4" girl in the middle, or they need 290-pound defensive tackle, or they need whatever. So the coaches are going to value those kids differently as a part of that. The interesting part of what you're, it's kind of an offshoot of what you asked, was we will graduate our student athletes about 15% higher rate than the general student population at Fort Hays, because of some of the support systems that we have in place, whether it's team mandated study tables, our supervised study table that we have in our athletic department that we require all incoming freshmen to do. We also help them get the resources they need, whether it's Kelly Center, tutors, which is available to everybody, but we help them in the sense that, hey, you need to get over here and do this, or go to this particular tutor, things like that. So as a support system, we're able to kind of support that process as well, more so than a general student population maybe has, depending on whether they're first-generation students who may not be even aware of the different services that are offered on campus or things of that nature. So we have some of those. We also have some first-generation students of ours that, without some of those, whether it's teammates, coaches, administration, whatever, they didn't realize that we had this service available, or these jobs available. You know, another thing that we try and do is we will put our athletes to work at our events. We typically will have our events staffed with concessions workers that are athletes, ticket takers. A lot of the ticket terrors and stampers and stuff are athletes. Security is athletes. We tend to hire a lot of athletes because they're able to fit into the schedule like we were talking about earlier. And our events are, I don't want to say small enough, but there's enough of us around administratively that we can usually be most places. We're not in a 55, 60, 80,000 seat venue. We're in a 5,000, 6,000 seat venue, to where administratively, if there's an issue, we can be there fairly quickly, versus an 80,000 seat venue where you've got to have professional security in all those places, because you can't be everywhere. You've got to have professional ticket takers and people, because of the technology. You wouldn't be able to run over to that gate and fix something. They've got to know what they're doing. So that's kind of a trade-off as it relates to those things. And that provides some skill sets to some of our kids, job skill-wise, customer service-wise, You know, we run our own concessions, so sometimes on off days, they will bag the ice, move merchandise, things of that nature, to where it's not a real taxing job, but we're not going to stick them, you know, at a cash register on game night with a big crowd anticipated, because they may not be able to process at the level they need to process. And so we try and put those kids in those types of positions. But, you know, to your point of I guess a leniency standpoint, we don't have a criteria that's real hard and fast, other than what the NCAA sets forth. And we have that checked and balanced with Lucy Williams, the registrar's office. We have it checked and balanced financial aid-wise with Wendy Roletter-Sook over there, Student Fiscal Services. There's a lot of checks and balances so that we don't think that we're too big for our britches and start writing big checks to all these athletes and getting them in a bunch of PUD classes, because the NCAA requires not only the 2.0 but the satisfactory progress toward a degree. And so you have to take not only the 12 hours a semester, but you have to be, those 12 hours have to be applicable towards your major, towards your degree. And so because of that, you can only give them so many, you know, real easy classes for them to be in at one time. Otherwise, eventually you're going to run out of daylight, and they're going to struggle. So, does that answer your question?
I think it's a little more lenient too, because as a student, like I was a student athlete for 4 years here, like it's not like it's a full-time job. It's 40 plus hours, plus you're like, for me, for soccer, we practice 7 to 9 every night, and that, you know, that takes an hour, you know, to get there, to get into your uniform, to set up for practice, and then, you know, you're awake after, have to do homework, and then you get up early and you do weights, and then you travel on the weekends, and it's literally 40 plus hours a week. It's more than just a full-time job, which paid probably 25% of my schooling, if that. I've paid more of it. So like, as far as getting paid to be an athlete, I think for Fort Hayes, if there could be more of a budget, I mean, at least for women's soccer, that's just my opinion, because I don't think they paid enough. But that wasn't why I played. It's because I love the sport. But like some of those student organizations, if you're suffering in your grades and you're not doing as well, then you can opt out of doing or going to that meeting. But I can't opt out of going to practice or not playing in a game because my grades are suffering. I have to figure that out. You know what I mean? So like some of those student organizations is like voluntary, but soccer is like, it is a full-time job, and I'm expected to be there even when I'm sick. You know what I mean? So I think.
Then you got the stress too of,
yeah. To perform.
I have to perform, because if I don't perform, I don't play. If I don't play, eventually I'm going to get cut, and then I don't have a job. You know, I'm just stuck right here, right now. Mid-season, I'm stuck. I got no way to pay for anything because I haven't been able to. I've been working track, working soccer. It's super, super, super stressful.
Every year we renew our scholarships with our kids. As a department, we have our coaches do that before they leave in the spring for the following year, so that everybody knows what's expected, what they're getting, all those types of things. So there's no surprises, and if you have a problem with the amount you're getting, you can yell and scream and holler and whatever. And so when that fall and spring semesters hit, that's the year that you know what you're getting. But every year it's a new amount, and it could be a higher amount, it could be a lower amount, it could be the same amount, but every year is everybody's year-to-year deal.
And based off of grades, if your grades are bad, you do suffer in practice. They make you run more, or you get to go to study table more, or you have morning running. So, I mean, there are incentives for students to do well. And there's also punishment if they're not doing well in the classroom. So, I mean, I think that's why the GPA is more lenient, because there is a lot more pressure on student athletes.
Yes, sir.
You said that Division II schools aren't offering stipends. Is that what you?
Yeah.
But what's keeping those Division II schools from offering stipends? Just money. do you think it'll eventually get there? Or maybe just depending on...
I don't see that happening. And the reason I say that is simply, I mean, we've got 450 roughly student athletes here at Fort Haynes. And as a dollars and cents measurement, not only are we limited with our physical dollars, we're also limited equivalency-wise, and there's a couple different dynamics at this with how scholarships are given out at Division I versus Division II, and this is a whole different topic altogether. But in short, if you're let's take football for example, you got 85 at Division I. In Division 1A, you've got 85 scholarships. You're either on it or you're off it. In Division II, we've got 36 equivalent scholarships to distribute between our whole team. We've got 75 to 100 guys on the roster, so you can do the math on that and figure out that that's not a lot of money. So when you start adding in on top of that the stipend piece, you really have a real barrel of fish hooks to deal with. But that does provide us some flexibility in the sense that you can give a kid a smaller amount or a larger amount year to year based on how they're doing, how they're developing, things of that nature. They have a breakout year, they're going to get a big bump. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. They had problems in the classroom or off the field. Now all of a sudden they're getting scaled back. But it's not an all or nothing proposition. You can still keep those kids involved with the program. You can still keep them doing things for you, and if everybody's going to make mistakes or screw up, they have an opportunity to right the ship and not just be cast out onto the bone pile with last week's news. So there's some differences in how Division I and Division II does the scholarship piece, which does factor into that stipend. But bottom line is going to be a dollars and cents issue, total dollars and cents, unless Jason finds a bunch. What other questions do you have? Yes.
What kind of private dollars would it take to make you guys whole in that way?
Well, it depends on what, and this is going to sound like a vague answer, but it would depend on how we were going to do, how we were going to allocate it. We have several different lines in our financial aid agreements that we write out. One of them's tuition line. We have an on-campus housing line. We have an off-campus housing line. We have a foundation line. We have a book line. And depending on where you wanted to make things whole and how you wanted to do it, the on-campus line is different than the off-campus line from a housing standpoint. The tuition line and the books line, I mean, they're all, I guess, separate funding mechanisms on the back end in the accounting world. But the other part that plays into it is equivalencies. How does the MIAA and the NCAA allow you to do your equivalencies, and where do those kids come from? And those are all factors in how we would do it. For example, we can get, for the sake of round figures, I'm going to say 10,000, 15,000, and 20,000 are the three levels. 10,000 would be an in-state kid, contiguous state would be 15, and an out-of-state kid would be $20,000 for total cost of attendance, housing, and all that sort of stuff. And I'm doing this for simple math because I'm not smart enough to do fractions beyond that. If we give a $5,000 scholarship to an in-state kid, out of his $10,000 cost of attendance, that's 0.5 from an equivalency standpoint. If we do that same $5,000 amount to an out-of-state kid, that's 0.25. So the kid's paying 15 out of pocket as opposed to 5, okay? The total of all those decimals is what that team's equivalency is allowed to be. Now, in the MIAA, football, volleyball, men's women's basketball, wrestling, men's women's soccer, softball, those sports are allowed to be funded at the NCAA maximum level. So 36 for football, 10 for basketball, 9.9 for women's soccer, 9 for men's, and it just scatters all the way down. Now, baseball, track, women's track, golf, tennis, women's golf, those are considered a separate set of sports, and they can be at the 75% of the NCAA allowable. They can be funded scholarship-wise as a group. And so that makes it tricky. Which sport are you going to fund at 75%? Because what can happen is baseball can go to 60%, golf may go to 90% of the total. And so those percents, I mean, baseball is allowed 9. Golf is allowed 4.5, I believe. So if you go 90% of 4.5 and 60% of 9, now all of a sudden you're kind of in a quandary as far as what numbers you're going to use to say how much do we need to fund to be at fully funded. But you know, we'll let you know when we got enough. How's that? Short answer is we'll never quite get there, I'm sure. But you know, scholarship-wise, we do bring in a lot of kids with not only the different types of scholarships that we offer, but we also try to bring in a lot of different fans and donors to help fund those, because that's an important piece of our puzzle funding-wise. And that's why, to go back to the other question, funding is going to be the bottom line driver of a lot of our decisions, you know, especially in a economy that's kind of a little bit of flux right now. So, yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure if I know how to ask this question, but so if a student gets a $5,000 scholarship, you mentioned there are different lines within that, housing and
Yep.
books, which I assume means textbooks,
Yes.
a textbook line. Can money flow between those? Do they get the 5,000, or do they have to use X amount for books and X amount for housing?
It depends on how it's written up. For example, if we did a $5,000 scholarship and it's an in-state kid, which is, for our example, is a $10,000 cost. He's a .5 guy. We could put that $5,000 into housing, whether it's on or off campus housing. That would flow in between those two pretty easy. Tuition, it's not as easy. The foundation scholarships are a little more restrictive, who can receive them and different criteria that the donors have set up on those types of deals. But yeah, it can take any number of forms. For example, if we've got a kid that is a high GPA kid or a high SAT kid, ACT, and they have a tuition scholarship for what is it, 32 or above, something like that you get here, that may then allow them to cover some more of their housing or do something different with that.
So they're all kind of customized.
Every one of them is unique. The 5,000 number that I pulled out of the air was just a total of all those different lines to be 5,000. But yeah, it can be what the kids need, what they're most interested in getting a chunk paid out of, because tuition, versus, you can set up your payment plans and do some of those different things. It just depends on what kind of a nut they need to cover, how they want to do it. So we try to work with the kids that way as much as we can. What other questions?
I apologize if I missed this earlier, but what's your personal view on the NCAA ever relaxing their rules on paying athletes to play?
Well, I think, with the passing of the stipend, there's a somewhat of a relaxed stance on that. It's more for the, that stipend's not gonna, make anybody millionaires, but what that does open up the gate to do a little bit, cracks the door open a little on, is finagling those numbers, especially at the big budget programs that have the resources, the unlimited dollars we're talking about, where it's just how much and not how we can pay it, it's how much it costs. Some of those places are going to be not necessarily within the institution finagling, but with the sheer number of donors, boosters, season ticket holders, the visibility of those athletes, that number can get finagled a little bit, and it provides a bit of a mechanism to create a scenario similar to what we had back in the mid-'80s with OU and University of Miami and some of the violations and no-show jobs and some of those types of, I mean, it provides a venue for that. Not to say that that's going to happen or would happen, but there's, if somebody's going to cheat, they're going to cheat. It's just a matter of how easy it is for them to do it, how quick they're going to get caught. So I would say that that's probably a little more, it gives you a little more rope to work with in that regard, but to be able to pay those kids, it's like we were talking about, having them getting some pocket money is what that basically boils down to. They don't have time to get a job on any type of regular basis, especially during their season. In the off season, we have a lot of our kids work, and whether it's at our events or, we've got kids that I'll never understand this. Brad Little, love him to death, qualified for nationals as a wrestler, works at the taco shop. I don't know how he keeps his weight down, but he does. Anyway, and he's doing that during the year, after the year, that type of thing. And it's because that's one of those sports we were talking about that doesn't really have a huge budget for scholarships, and it's one of those deals that he's got to manage his weight and do his workouts and go to school, and so there's all kinds of opportunities, but at the same time there's all kinds of trade-offs that you make as an athlete especially at this level. The stipend is at the Division I level designed to not have to have so many irons in the fire, especially because they're counting on those guys to play on Saturday or to entertain 100,000 fans as opposed to 5,000 fans. And that's a economic plus the TV contracts and the rights fees for all that stuff is so high now that it's a more, they want to take as many distractions away as they can. So if they keep pocket money in these kids' pockets so that there's not as big a concern, then they can focus more on their school and their sport and provide it with a little less, because they're going to be under enough pressure when that many people are screaming at them in a large venue. So yes.
Brad, I got a question about recruiting.
Yeah.
What are the parameters you have to work around, guidelines that you have to be careful not to abuse or overdo, or that handcuff you maybe? Also, the second part of that is there's a number of large, well-known institutions who get in trouble for recruiting violations at a national NCAA Division I level. What type of things did they do wrong, or what type of problems are there?
If you're not, I'll take the second question first. There will always be violations of some sort, secondary violations, because that rule book's about that thick and written in legalese like we were talking earlier. And I would say 90+% of the Division I schools have lawyers on staff in their compliance office. Certified JD carrying lawyers in their compliance office. And that's because of the amount of money that's involved and the things that they got to go through. Recruiting wise, there's a section on recruiting where you're allowed to have them on campus for 48 hours at a maximum. You're allowed to pay for certain things on official visits, not pay for certain things on unofficial visits. It just depends. You can talk to them at certain times of the year, not talk to them. And some of the rules are a little squirrely and kind of defy a little bit of common sense, in the sense that during certain periods you can't go watch or observe practices or games. There's other times where you can go and observe, but you can't be in contact with the parents or the kid. So even if parents know you and you can't talk to them at the event or after the event. It's kind of a convoluted deal, and there's a lot of little snags that you can get caught up in. But they've relaxed a lot of the rules on the amount of phone calls and texts and tweets and Facebook messages and stuff like that. With the advent of social media, they've had to change some of that stuff, because back when I was coaching and playing, you were allowed a phone call a week, and I'm an old guy, and so that was really the only means of communicating. We didn't have email or any of that sort of stuff, so it was, you could be pretty much on level with everybody else. But anymore, with Facebook and Twitter and all these other things, they've changed and revised their rules to the point where it's a little more conducive to have some contact with the kids on a more regular basis. And as kids, I know this because I got a couple of them myself, they would rather text than talk, and that drives me absolutely bananas. If my kids send me about more than 3 texts in a row, I'm just calling. If we can't solve it in 2 or 3 texts, we're going to have a conversation. It's going to take us 2 minutes to solve it, as opposed to 45 minutes worth of texting back and forth. And kids these days are different that way. They like Facebook and all these other, Twitter and all these things. I've got all that stuff, but I don't use it hardly at all. And that's because I'd rather talk to somebody or talk on the phone with somebody than I would sit there and...
You really are old, aren't you?
I'm an old guy. I'm high mileage and I'm old, so that don't make me worth much. But yeah.
I'm just curious, from the student athlete perspective, time management has come up several times. What do we have other services on campus? I'm thinking tutoring, I don't know what I'm thinking, but services that really make a difference for you all in terms of time
If
management?
you
Or
had
the things
more, if they'd had more freedom with the tutoring, because of classes plus work plus track, everything combined together, I didn't have any time for that. It was all on me, studying, hoping.
Tutoring at midnight would have helped you maybe,
Oh, yeah.
but yeah.
We do the study table. We have it open from 7 a.m. to 5, Monday through Thursday, 7 to 3 on Fridays over in the athletic department. We have a supervisor, Dixie Ballman is our compliance. She supervises it, and we also have a GA. So we've always got somebody on hand, and they help set up a lot of the tutoring sessions with Kelly Center or with folks to help our kids, because they know that we've got a football kid and we've got a baseball kid and we've got 2 track kids, and they all are having trouble in. They can coordinate and be more efficient for the tutors as well, to say, hey, if we get these 4 kids here at this time, will you work with them, that type of thing, kind of coordinate that type of stuff. And it makes it nice for us, because we do have a good relationship with the academic side of things, and we expect our kids to go to class, and if they don't, there's ramifications. They're usually not enjoyable, as Laura had mentioned earlier. If you don't go to class, you don't do what you're supposed to do, there's consequences, and that's a truth that our department as a whole expects our kids to do. And we're fortunate in the fact that we have, over the last several years, graduated about 15% higher rate than the general student population. So that speaks well to Mrs. Bird and also to Dixie and the time and effort they put in to getting those kids through those classes and getting them what they need support-wise, because not a lot of kids. So we have a lot of first-generation kids that come to school here and play a sport, and that's a great opportunity, especially when you see those kids graduate, and that's what makes it really nice. You see those kids that walk across the stage and know they got better.
Brad, do the tutors ever travel with the teams? Like when the basketball team does the MIAA tournament, they're gone for a week.
No, we don't send anybody on the road with them as far as tutors and stuff like that. When they're on the road, that's strictly a business trip for those guys, and so we keep all that piece of it separate. They're supposed to talk to their instructors before and make up arrangements to figure out what they're missing on those days. And on the bus, it's usually pretty quiet, because there's a lot of times, and those of you guys who are athletes can probably attest to this, you know, you're working on reading, getting caught up on reading, getting caught up on rest, getting caught up on, I mean, there's only about 3 things you're going to be doing. It's reading, resting, or sleeping, or you know, getting ready for the game, prep work. And so those are the 3 main things that a lot of those trips involve. And our closest trip's Kearney or Topeka or Emporia, so you got 2 hours on a bus to start with. It gets longer from there, so you got plenty of time to nestle in and get some stuff done.
Do online courses help, hurt?
They're harder to stay on top of.
They're harder to stay on top of.
They help me,
Do they?
but
They-
I prefer in class.
We've had both those comments from our athletes, and the online works good if you're got some structure and got some regimentation to it, but if you're procrastinating, and that's not knocking or praising, I'm just saying that it's just different.
Different learning styles.
And the other thing it does, in some cases, we've had kids that have had to take online classes because of the time it was offered on campus, interfered with practices a lot of times. And, you know, that's why Laura's practicing at 7 to 9 at night for women's soccer, because the classes, the labs, and some of those things are only offered in the afternoons, and that's fine. So we adjust around those classes to accommodate practice times, and you know, we don't say, well, miss your lab because we're practicing at 3. That's not what we expect, so we don't set that example either.
I don't know how you all do it, frankly. I really don't. It's an amazing juggling.
Well, and it
process.
provides some good, you know, I've been in this business for a lot of years, and between being in the Midwest and student athletes in general, those 2 things can be really positive things when you go to apply for jobs and get into the workforce, and make notes of those things, because there's a lot of people that put a lot less stock in a 2.8 GPA, but if you were involved in a sport for 4 or 5 years and things of that nature, 2.8's not going to kill you, you know. I know GPA sometimes is looked at as kind of the holy grail of employability, but there's a lot to be said for teamwork and being able to grind it out for 6, 8, 9 months in a sport over a period of years. That speaks to a lot of employers, and a lot of kids don't necessarily realize that until years later. And I always try and tell them, don't be ashamed of where you came from or what you did, you know, because that's something that can benefit you, because those skills are transferable to whatever industry you're going into. You know, those are all going to be things that you need to be able to do. And so that's having that skill set already in your pocket makes you a little more valuable than maybe somebody who just locked themselves in their dorm room for 4 years and got a 4.0, didn't ever see the outside world except when they were going to class. So, yes, sir.
I had a question about, like, as boosters, what we can do for students. So if I'm at Qdoba and I see, you know, the quarterback in front of me, can I buy him lunch? Is that, am I infraction?
An occasional meal, and like I said, it's why they got lawyers on staff at all these places, because it's written so vague, you could get on either side of it. An occasional meal, and it can't be an extra benefit. And so if the quarterback is there with 3 non-athletes and they all come in together, basically, and I'm not the compliance guy, that's why I don't do it. I was in minor league baseball. We sold everything, and we would do anything for anything for a buck. So I'm probably the worst one to answer this, but you can't just say, well, I'm buying his, but I'm not buying yours, or yours. You know, that type of thing. So you'd have to buy the whole thing in that regard. But the way it's worded is very sketchy. The safe thing to do is just wave to them and go on. But it's very very vague, and that makes it good and bad. And so just a matter of how it's interpreted, who does the interpretation, and how that works. Yeah. Any other questions?
All right, so I think that means we're through here. Thank you so much. You did an
Oh,
excellent job.
well, thank you guys for coming. Appreciate it.
I didn't mention this before. My name is Vivian Agnew, and this is a Times Talk, something that the American Democracy Project does. You'll notice in front of you there are little like table tent size flyers. They're for an event we're doing. It's called the Art of